All right, let's turn over to Titus. Last week I closed and said, we get to move into chapter 3 because we finished chapter 2. But no, we didn't. Because there's a phrase that I skipped. So we're going to look at that last verse again, and we don't want to leave out, thank you, we don't want to leave out that phrase because it's important. Speak these things, exhort and rebuke with all authority. Let no one despise you. I didn't go into detail. I think we did in application, but in specifics of the characteristic of what it means when it says with all authority. When you hear the idea of authority, we think biblical authority, but this is actually a different word. And the nature of it, I think, speaks to the role that Titus had. For example, when you go over to Matthew 28, verse 18, and Jesus says, all power, authority, hath given unto me in heaven and in earth, that word is referring more to what he himself has as a result of who he is and what he's accomplished. That's not this word. But rather, this is the idea of an injunction or a responsibility that has been passed on to him. And so the whole concept here of the orderliness that has been placed upon you, you've been given this order. And so the nature of a gospel preacher should be, contrary to Jesus can speak from his own authority as being God. But a gospel preacher speaks from the authority that is rooted in the message he's been given to speak. It's not personal authority. And that's really important, especially when you end up in some cases around the world of preachers trying to take and present themselves as kind of an absolute authority over people within a congregation. Whereas the way in which he emphasizes this is the authority that a preacher has comes from his responsibility and what he's proclaiming from God and doing that faithfully. And so what you find Titus being told to do here is you are to speak these things, and he goes back through that whole chapter, doesn't matter who the person is, and all these things that are sound doctrine, everything that people need to hear that involve real life. He says, speak these things, exhort and rebuke. We talked about that is, there's a positive and a negative, a kind of a pushing onward, forward, and this is good, and a corrective to know you're not getting that right. Those things need to be put in place, but that needs to be done with all authority. The recognition that you've got a responsibility to carry this out, and that you are not to hold back on your own from what I've told you to do. Now, I want you to think about how that plays out. It means that anybody who takes on the responsibility of getting up and teach and preach from God's word needs to be careful he's not watering down what's being said. That what's being said is both accurate to what the text says, but also presented in its fullness from God in a recognition of why we should follow it. And you think about times in which if you don't do it with all authority, you don't kind of put it on out there of what needs to be said, we end up kind of making excuses for it. Have you ever heard someone that they're talking about what God says, and then they're seeing how many different ways we can get around having to do what God says? We're going to make, well, I know it says that, but, and we'll come around and we'll do this. And you start, it just kind of, back in the, I don't know how many of y'all remember this, when you start talking about crawfishing. All of a sudden it's out there and you're making a way back out of what it said. Bill? Right. And if you I'm sorry I have to tell you this. Don't take this the wrong way. And there's a good way to present truth. without apologizing for truth. You can present, I think sometimes people think that's being loving, but we need to make sure we can be loving without being ashamed. We can care for people and to point out why we're saying these things. Basically, here's what it says. But we've already seen God provides the motivations if we'll present them of why we should be doing this and why it's in other people's interest to listen. Now, they need to see a reflection of this in our lives. They needed to see a reflection of the kindness and the goodness and the love and the mercy, as well as the strength and the dedication to truth. They need to see all of that in us when we talk to them about it. But we certainly don't need to be apologizing for the fact of anything it says, and it doesn't matter how maybe countercultural that might be. Now, there are going to be some things that are going against where our culture is. That's just how it is. But you don't apologize for that. And we kind of forget, you realize that the gospel was countercultural in the Roman Empire in the first century. In different ways than today, but it was still countercultural. So they weren't apologizing for that fact, and we shouldn't either. Stan?
I think it's like whenever you go to hear a sermon, by us going, we're saying to the preacher or whoever is preaching, sir, we would see Jesus.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right out of John, huh?
Well, I heard it before.
Yeah.
It seemed very
It's very biblical.
Yeah, very
It is. Is it get out of the way, let what's there, and that's actually the job, is to, matter of fact, I said, not just get out of the way, but lift it up and put it forward. Here's what God says. And stop making it about you. It doesn't need to be about you. It's all because in the end, what you need to see is, here's what this is what's between you and God. I'm going to point it out, but you're going to have to deal with it, and I'm going to try to help you. But there may be some things that you need to work on, but you can't work on it if you don't know. And so we're not doing people any favors when we kind of soft soap the gospel so much they don't know they need to change something. We don't need to make it harder on them than what it is. Matter of fact, we need to be there to help them change things that they need to change. And starting with their own example, being one that's willing to change. Okay? And if they've never seen you change and try to prove on anything, why would they think they needed to? Right? So we ought to be that kind of people. And then he closes this, and going back to it, he says, let no one despise you. Okay? When you're putting that out there, don't let people treat you like the bad guy for saying what needs to be said, what I've said. All right. I was about to say chapter 3, and instead I'm going to say, let me hear you, John.
Always got a delay for you. A couple of words. I got the Greek here, so the word for exhort.
Mm-hmm.
Parakalei, or
Right.
something. Call along. So parable.
Well, only the first part of that word is the same. Oh, yeah, para. That's the same. That means alongside.
Yeah, alongside. So that, to me, that exhort isn't from way back pushing or calling, and it's not way out in front. You're with them.
No. It's a calling alongside. It's the idea of bringing around, put your hand around them, and let's see it from this perspective. Let's take a look at it from how God sees things. That's exhort. And so that's why it can be, the same word is translated comfort, beseech, exhort, urge. But the emphasis is a very personal term of, let's come over here and get some perspective in what we're doing. But now you have something on the word rebuke, though? Let's hear it.
Oh, despise?
Mm-hmm. Oh, despise, okay.
This is to reinforce what you said last week about that preposition in front of that word is peri.
Right.
Perimeter.
Uh-huh.
Around you, like it says.
Right.
It helps me to kind of picture.
Yeah,
Prepositions.
it's a combination of to think around. So it's kind of like you're in front of me. We're having this conversation, and you're saying something really important, and I'm like doing this. And I'm going to see what somebody else maybe has to say about it, and so that's kind of what's going on. Okay, so yeah, very good, very good. All right, we ready for chapter 3?
Yes.
I'm going to stop asking that question. All right, Bill.
Some have taken verse 5 as a dictatorship to set things in order from that last verse and want to hammer.
Yes, yes, and that's clearly not what he's going into. Is that when he says set things in order, you combine that with these words. He's telling them how to do it. The setting in order is both making sure elders are in place, chapter 1, that the false teachers are addressed. That's also the second part of chapter 1. But also everybody there is instructed properly in the kind of Christian they need to be. That's setting things in order. And you make sure that you are to do that with whatever the need is, with some positive kind of encouragement and also some correction along the way. Don't let anybody, you do that with godly authority behind you, but don't let objections and anybody's opinions get in the way of your doing this. Don't let someone stop you from doing this, because this is what your mandate is from me, Paul, in order to get this done. All right, I'm not asking, I'm telling. Chapter 3. We're going to go ahead and read all 3 of the first 3 verses and look at it as a whole, and then go see it specifically. Remind them to be subject to rulers and authorities, to obey, to be ready for every good work, to speak evil of no one, to be peaceable, gentle, showing all humility to all men. For we ourselves were also once foolish, disobedient, deceived, serving various lusts and pleasures, living in malice and envy, hateful and hating one another. Watch out, we've got a word list, okay, or a couple of them. Now remember where he started this, though, and when we get to this example, he's been very personal so far. It was kind of looking around and saying, okay, you need to deal with the elders. Now we need to deal with the false teachers. Now we need to deal with everybody in particular. But this is kind of the whole blanket, and this is the big application first, the one they needed. And it's about how you are as a citizen. What's your attitude and your behavior like as a citizen? Which tells you something, or if you'll remember, about the background we went over, when the time frame was, when Titus was coming out, that there was a lot of stuff going on around this time. This was probably, we're thinking around probably 63 AD. So there's a lot of stuff going on in the world. You have things on Crete. We're not sure exactly all of those things. But Nero has kind of already started on his downward spiral. And they're saying, hearing themselves, remind them to be subject to rulers and authorities. That's the start. And these 2 words are government words. And it's hard because to try to get an exact parallel between these 2 words and try to fit it within a modern kind of system. I mean, if you look at it, every country has kind of its own approach to how we do things. This is generic enough to kind of capture it. Be subject to rulers. So that is the person in charge at whatever level. Okay, so you're talking about, for them it would have been, they're in the Roman Empire, so we're dealing with the emperor. It would have been a governor, and it would have been some magistrate. Those are the people that make the decisions, and we need to make sure we are subject to them. And then it follows with authorities. And this is that other word for authority. That is, but it's more the idea of out of the position you hold. Okay? So, exousia, this is a general word of authority. But when you think about what authority means and what he's doing, what's the difference in who are the people that would be authorities that were not rulers? Maybe judges, not a bad guess, but the way in which usually they conducted their law, the governors, if you recall, were doing the judging too, just like Pontius Pilate was, just as you have Festus was, and they were the ones that are handling all it. So it was very much an executive system. We're used to trying to fit all this in within a a threefold system. And, you know, by the time you get to the Roman Empire, the point of it being an empire is the Senate is, while it still exists and it's still running people through, it's not really a legislative type of body. They are there to kind of rubber stamp what the emperor does. Don't worry, give it a few years and you'll understand better what that means. Right? Oh, no political statements? So you just kind of, you see that's what that's the way it would work. Okay, you just have everything. So essentially you'd have the executive. So this also is like the authorities or the people under him that are enforcing and putting all that in. It's all not quite bureaucrats, but almost. So the whole idea though is, and the verb you need to focus on is, you're going to remind them toward rulers and authorities to be subject or to submit themselves. Right? Now, I think that I like it better in the middle voice, to submit themselves, because it says this is your responsibility to do. And because it is rooted in a military term of the idea of to order yourself beneath. I said that the word in verse 15 about authority had the idea of order in it. John was bringing up the difference in the prepositions that are attached. Well, that had the preposition epi to it. This is that same root word, but with hupo underneath. So epi is over, ordered over. This is ordered under. So you are to accept the fact that you are ordered in the general scheme of society. You are ordered under these people. And your way you are to conduct yourself should reflect that. Now, that's the general framework. Is what is he saying? They're the ones in charge. Now, we have to go over this before I get to the rest of it, though. Did you hear who I said was emperor at this time? Nero. This is not like your number one emperor. Now, don't get me wrong. Any of those guys were pretty hard-hearted and had plenty of people that had killed. Okay, so don't act like they're like some of them were just super nice and everything. But there were bad things that just went on. But their job was order. They did it with a heavy hand. They had very little conception even of God as we would think of it. But that was the role that they had, understanding that God created government. That doesn't mean he is engineering everything to his liking all the time. But government, he set up. That's Romans 13. So we are to accept that. And in accepting that means that, by very nature, things are not always going to go your way. And I want to emphasize that because I think sometimes, and this is where I see society going, is we've kind of become kind of a little bit childlike. No, that's the wrong word. Childish, that's the word. In that we don't handle it very, very well if it doesn't go our way. Election doesn't go our way, you just get all sorts of bad behavior. You got any particular ruling or decision doesn't go our way, we don't handle it very well. And partly it has to do with this attitude of we've got to learn to accept, number one, where did you get the idea that it would? I'm trying to think in my life, yeah, everything was always going my way. And it just doesn't work that way. We forget what the purpose is, and we can forget what our purpose is in government when you look at all of this, and I think about if you cross-reference 1 Timothy chapter 2, verses 1 and 2 as well. Our role here is to recognize them in their role and not think that that's our place. Now, we are in a different kind of situation when you're in a democracy because we get to participate in the system. We get a say. Your say is you get that vote, and after that, you have to accept the way things are, and you just go ahead, okay? Now, when he says next, though, so he says, you are to subject, you're to understand your role, your place is to underneath and to follow the law. Now, I'm not going to go into a deep discussion on this. But in our system of divided government, it becomes very difficult sometimes. Because you have to figure out, Congress is in charge of making the laws. It needs to be signed on, but let's say it was already signed. So Congress made the law. Then the executive is responsible for enforcing the law. And then the judicial branch is in charge of saying whether or not that's really the law. Okay, so it was designed this way. Okay, for those of you want to have a, discussion of political science later, I'll happy to oblige. But it was designed this way to have tension in the system, but that makes it more difficult sometimes to understand. Is the law the moment that Congress passes it, putting it in place, or is it only become the law when the executive also enforces it? Or is the executive not enforcing it, showing that the executive is not following the law that Congress made? That'd be most correct. Or find out, well, we're going to go ahead and we're going to defy the law until the Supreme Court makes a decision on whether or not that's actually the law. See, that's the kind of tension that we have, and the problem is this attitude. Because the underlying attitude we get is, I'm going to not follow certain laws unless I absolutely have to. That's not what he's saying here. Okay? There are going to be laws you don't like. I'm going to give everyone the opportunity. Is there any particular law that you really don't like? Just go ahead, get it out there. It's just going to be here forever on the internet, but any particular law you really don't like? Not enough time. Okay, good. I didn't face this. Okay, when I learned how to drive, they were just putting in all the seatbelt laws. But whoa, I'm telling you, there were a lot of people that were not very happy. I went down. Apparently, one's over there. I'm not sure. I went down a few years after that. I was in college, and I went down to Austin, part of a student government thing. And I went down to Austin, and they were having a protest at that time of motorcyclists on helmet laws. Okay? Which apparently that one worked. So you have that, and what do you do about it? Okay? So I don't like that law. Well, there's some things you say, I don't like that. You know what I don't like? I don't like trying to drive through Watauga during school time, at which you're going downhill into 25 miles per hour, and it feels like you got someone with lights on his car following you the whole time. I'm not a fan, okay? And I'm happy to go the speed limit, even when I think it may be ridiculous, okay? All right, but I'm going to do it, okay? We're going to go on through, read a book. Oh, okay, no, not. I'll pay attention. But you don't always like it, but you submit. You do what the law says to do, okay? Now understand, some of the issues they were having here during this time were a lot bigger than anything we just went over. John?
Just to pass along some information along this line, I'm going to Market Street down 26, come to a full and complete stop at a red light, then see it's clear, take a right turn, fixing to make a left turn, and as kind of ease into the left lane, as to make my turn, get stopped. You have to stay in the right lane for some distance when you turn right after red.
Yes.
I didn't get a ticket, but I started to argue with the nice lady.
Yeah. Okay, that's good. Now, that kind of tells you is sometimes there are some things you don't even know are laws that guess what? Okay, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Okay? So we're just going to have to go through and do that. Like I said, they had a lot tougher things that they were going to have to do. So let's think about some things that we take for granted. That there are going to be some things that all of a sudden people are in the church, if I pushed them hard enough, I bet you I could get I could sniff out a rebellious streak. Right? That wouldn't take that long. Let me see here. No, we're going to take your guns. No, that's guns. Okay. Oh, see, already people like, that would affect me too. Okay, going on the record, that would affect me too. But it's like there are certain things you like, and you think about what they could do is just making life difficult for you as a Christian. And this was in the future, within the lifetimes of some of the people who were reading this. That it was going to, all of a sudden, trying to find a way to follow the law was going to cost them a lot, financially. Just by having to go through hoops and identify yourself or not do things that would to be in the right circles. Okay? All of those things. What do? You follow the law. Now, if we didn't get that yet, the next word he goes into, he says, to obey. So remind them, number one, to be subject to rulers and authorities. But then he adds that, to obey. This is an interesting word. It smashes together another couple, which is, if I'll try to give it a feel, to accept the persuasion of those rulers. In other words, you need to go in listening to what they tell you to do. That can be pretty hard. Sometimes it's easier sometimes just to go and forget about it, accept it and do it, but to actually listen to them, just because that's another level of respect, of being willing to listen to what they're having to say and to follow along. Now, the question is here, you realize that he's telling them this even though some of these laws are going to most definitely end up being contrary to God's will. And that does not mean then that they were to be treated and that we were to just accept and respect and say, okay, well, that's the law, and therefore that's the right thing to do. No. It's still better to obey. What is it? You ought to obey God rather than man. Acts 5, verse 29. So we've got to recognize that we're going to do the right thing, no matter what. But there are a lot of things in the law that don't require us to do wrong. They're just extremely inconvenient, annoying, problematic, or it can cost us at either time, money, or something like that level. Okay. Now, that's not something I'd prefer, and I'm going to personally, when I have an opportunity, I'm going to try to prevent that with my own little check mark, right? Or I guess now it's, okay. I'm going to try to prevent it. But in the end, we have a responsibility because of order. And it goes back to what I was saying on Sunday about sometimes we forget where the primary responsibility is. It's not creating a society that is ordered the way we want it. It's trying to get people's lives in order with God's will the way He wants it. That is to be our focus. Now, are there advantages to having a society with order? That, including some moral order? Are there some real advantages to that? Absolutely. Okay? Because it makes our job easier. But sometimes we think that if we can get the externals of society to match up like what we want, that we fool ourselves into thinking that morally everything's fine. Well, that's not true. That's still not true. That's right. That's right. The government typically is going to end up being a reflection of that society. The answer for the government is to start working on the society. That's not done by a vote. Okay, government is about structure. Society is about people. And we need to understand that difference if we're going to have an effect on the right part, which is the people and the souls involved, that we care. Does the other matter to us? Yeah, I've spent a lot of my lifetime trying to work on some of those things. But we have to keep it within the framework of Scripture and our right priorities. Okay? No, yeah.
I'm not going to obey because they're taking away my.
My God-given right. Yeah. And I'd like to remind people, I said, look, I understand where you're coming from, but let's correct some things. The Bible was inspired, the Declaration of Independence wasn't. Constitution wasn't. Do I appreciate them? I sure do. Do I think there was a lot of providence involved in that? I sure do. But there's a difference between which one has authority over us and which one we're to follow. And now he's going to get to the why. Okay? What are we to focus on? You be ready to submit, you be ready to listen and obey, but what are you actually supposed to be paying attention to? To be ready for every good work. How many times have we seen some aspect of good work show up in this book? He's been laying out all kinds of things we're supposed to be doing as good works. And so what is he saying? You just handle these things, accept these things so that you're ready to do what God wants you to do. What kind of activity does God want you doing? That's what you need to be focused on. And the word is ready, is prepared. Now that means you've done some homework, your heart's in it, you've put some thought into it, and you're looking for situations where you can apply it. Every good work. Again, the idea of a moral quality to our activity. That we're out here trying to find ways to do good. Okay? Now, we're limited. You can't do everything, and matter of fact, I would say, and some of y'all see what you think, I think it's getting a little harder in some ways because, again, society is becoming more naturally closed off, and you're just going to say, oh, this is the internet. Okay, it started a long time before the internet. You know when it started? Air conditioning. It started with air conditioning and modern appliances. With air conditioning, you stay inside. When it's 101 outside, how many of you are going out on the front porch and say, oh, this is great? Isn't that a nice breeze? No. If you're inside a house that doesn't have air conditioning, you're going outside of that house, and any little whipping up of the wind, you're following along as best you can. Okay? Different. What about washer or dryer? See, I'm going to have to take the kids out on a particular historical exercise to go out and see if we can discover a clothesline. All right? I remember going to my grandparents. That's what you did. What is it? Matter of fact, you had a clothesline and you could see and talk to your neighbor who's also hanging clothes up. And when you went out front to cool off, they were on their front porch right over there, and you're having a conversation. Okay, so just the nature of advancement in technology has taken us more in, and so instead we have conversations on Facebook. How are those going for you? Those aren't the same. Why? Because the interaction, you don't have as much invested. Okay, it's not as personal. Instead, so you have to think, and you have to be more active about it in saying, in this interaction with anybody, what can I do to do good? You know, even sometimes just to stand out, and sometimes it's being willing to accept that you did something wrong, you made a mistake. Sometimes if all you do is apologize to someone who's in the service industry because it was your mistake, though you may watch, they may die from shock. But it'd be nice, you know, that was on me. I went through and I made a mistake at a drive-through because I'd hit the same order, but I had ordered something I don't usually order. It was a McDonald's, sorry. But I went through and did that, and so he's handing me the drink. I'm like, that's not my order. I didn't order a drink. And so he's dropping it off, and I'm like, wait a minute, this is mine. So I pull my hand away. I barely caught the drink. And then I look down and says, oh, I did order the drink. And I did my best because I'd seen him multiple times coming through. He doesn't speak English. So I said, lo siento. And I wanted him to understand. I recognized finally this was my fault. And but that's an after the fact. We need to be more open positively about seeing if we can't have a good effect on people. Of just seeing what they could use. You know how many people could just use a friend? I mean, a real friend. Those are getting hard to come by, and just someone that you can count on that is not going to talk about you, but is there to help you. Someone who's interested in you and is trying just to go through life and enjoy doing a few things. Those are harder to find. A positive word, a helpful, encouraging word from there, just telling you, hey, stick in there, you're a good person, things are going to work out for you. Sometimes that really is nice, right? So we need to keep that in mind. Okay. Now he keeps kind of building on everything he said, and notice how he's getting into more societal things. So he starts with government, and now he's working out who are you going to do? What are you going to do? And notice what he does when you move into verse 2. To speak evil of no one. And that's the word blaspheme. Now this is interesting because you don't usually see the word blasphemeo used regarding other people. That's usually used just of God. But it's not here. And it has the idea of slander or to malign. I like the word malign as a word. That is, you're saying things in order to disparage someone, to bring them down. You don't need to be doing that. So notice how he's now moving into more society. Do good. Try to be the person who's helping out. And now, let's not do something that is often too common in society, which is, let's see if I can't be the troll on Twitter. Oh, I'm not even sure what they call it now. But I'm going to be that person who finds joy in just going around and seeing if I can't, going around poking the bear all the time. Right? Says, don't be doing that. Don't be just trying to find a way to irritate people and to think that, well, you're going to go out and I'm going to call them out on that. Well, how about we help them out? There's a lot of times that you have to be able to point out that someone's done something, but if you're getting all gleeful about it, there's an attitude problem here. That should not fall into the category of something you enjoy doing. That here's somebody who has done something and you're going to, let me. I've had to do that. And it's just not fun. You don't want to, you'd rather them get it corrected. And that should be our attitude even when we have to point out what they're doing is wrong.
I see this phrase, especially in reference to verse 3, not speaking evil of other people because, and just, it's all about, it's having empathy.
Yes, it is about empathy. And it's about understanding, if you think all these verses, it's understanding who you are as a human being and seeing yourself not as elevated, but simply one person that is part of everyone who's got responsibilities before God. And that we need to make sure that we do not act like we're on the top of the heap all the time. And he's going to get to that in just a second.
It's kind of like who do you listen to? Like you listen to if I was a person who was every time you got something wrong, I was so thrilled to point it out to you and rub it in your nose. What did you learn about that? But if someone who is, like he says, meek and gentle and peaceable, if they come to you and they say, hey, you posted this, you might want to read it. What kind of reaction do you get then? One where the person actually is going to go, maybe you're right, maybe the way I did it isn't how it came across, or not just with posting, but with lots of things.
Yeah.
I think that what he's trying to point out is that one of the things, if you're not, even with, obeying, if you do things, you speak evil of the leaders, or then
Yeah.
you try to do something to make a change for better, you've already discredited yourself.
Okay, let's build on that. Okay, if we go back and we're talking about the way in which we look at government working our way down, how often do we look at that certain people, because they're public figures, it's okay to malign them? Now, people will do, it's okay to recognize this person is doing something wrong and be accurate about it, but it's different where we're going out of our way to try to basically disparage their name and ruin that person and treat their name as almost a slur or something. Okay? That's the problem. I really thought we'd get to what it means to be peaceable. I'll give you a hint. It means not warring, which is different from having a positive word that you would expect here about being peaceable. We immediately go to being a peacemaker. That's actually not here. He is trying to prevent something, which is to say, if all these things are, don't be that, which is this is what the temptation is. So rather than he's trying to correct, this is a little bit of that rebuke part, is that here are some things that maybe y'all are having issues with. This is not what you need to be. That person who is always looking for a fight, and it doesn't have to be fisticuffs. There's some people, okay, then we'll close. You know, there's some people, and this sadly, because I've seen Christians like this, they'll say something online that is wrong. They got it wrong. And you're thinking, oh, should I comment? I know what happens when you comment on this person's post. It never ends well. Because they're not going to change. They're just going to go after you, and it's going to be argumentum ad hominem from the very beginning, and they're right, you're wrong, and therefore you're a horrible person. But that's what you get. And there are other people that you look out there, and they're ready for a fight. There are people out there looking for some. That it's kind of like that's what motivates them. That's what gets them going. Is I need to pick a fight with someone. Maybe it could be over doctrine. You know, they going out and I'm going to pick a fight with someone because that's really gets me going and makes me feel important. Well, if that's what makes you feel important, you got other issues. You got some spiritual issues. And but that's really where we're going. I want to pick up with that next week. Yes. Next week we'll pick up there. But first, we're going to hear what John has to say.
So, I've got 3 different sources here.
Okay. You need to cite them.
I've got all humility is one version there.
On which word?
James.
Which word?
Humility. Oh, it's on whatever humility is on.
Are you dealing with words I'm not to yet?
We're in verse 2.
Well, I know, but I'm not really through verse 2.
Oh, you're not in verse 2?
I am in verse 2,
Yeah.
but I only made it to peaceable.
Well, I'll save it for next week.
I'm coming up on it.
Perfect courtesy. All humility.
Yes, and those are interesting words. Those are not normal words. Those are not standard words, and there's a rich history with both those words. So yes, put a marker on it, study it, but I'm going to be ready too. All right, let's pray.